In order to give people enough time to get in the chat, I'm going to start this video with a story. So give me some time and bear with me, and hopefully by the time this one's done, everybody will be in the chat and ready to watch the video that's coming up. Of the old time, far up the Sigwani River, a branch turns off to the north, running back into the land of ice and snow. 10 families went up this stream one autumn in their canoes, to be gone all winter long for a hunt. Among them was a beautiful girl, about 20 years of age. A young man in the band wished her to become his wife, but she flatly refused him. Perhaps she did it in such a way as to wound his pride. Certainly, she roused all that was savage in him, and he gave up all his mind to revenge. Now this young man was skilled in medicine and in magic, so he went into the woods and gathered an herb which makes people insensible. Then sneaking into the lodge when all were asleep, he held it to the girl's face until she had inhaled the odor and could not be easily awakened. Going out, he made a ball of snow and in return placing it in the hollow of her neck, in front just below her throat. Then he retired without being discovered, so she could not wake while the chill went to her heart. After a few days, she began to grow fierce, as thought she wished to kill someone. At last, she begged her parents to kill her. She had loved them very much. Now she told them that unless they killed her, she would certainly be their death. Her whole nature was being changed. She could feel it internally. "How can we kill you?" her mother and father asked. "You must shoot me," she replied, "with 7 arrows, and if you can kill me with 7 shots, all will be well. But if not, sadly I will kill you all." 7 men shot at her as she sat in the wigwam. She was not bound nor tied, and every arrow struck her in the chest, but she sat firm and unmoved. 49 times they pierced her. From time to time, she would look up with an encouraging smile. With the last arrow struck her, she fell dead. They then burned her body as she had directed. It was soon reduced to ashes, with the exception of the cold, cold heart, which was made of the hardest ice. This required much more time to melt and finally break, but at last it was all over. She had been brought under the power of an evil spirit. She was rapidly being changed into a Chinnu, a wild, fierce, unconquerable being, but she knew it all the while, and it was against her will, so she begged that she might be killed. Her tribe left this place. Since that day, none have ever returned to it. They feared that maybe some small part of her body might have remained unconsumed by the fire, and that from it, another Chinnu would rise up, seeking revenge, capable of killing all who she met. And that is the story of the girl and the Chinnu. Thank you for taking the time to sit back and listen to the story. The presentation will be coming up shortly, so please just stick with me, and thanks for bearing with me. Please leave a comment afterwards and let me know what you think. Greatly appreciated. Today we're going to be looking into something that I find very interesting. With my studies in folklore and the folklore of many different places, you'll find many things. Shapeshifters, you'll find sirens, you'll find different types of things. But one specific thing you'll always find in common is regardless of where you go, they always have giants. Giants from here, biblical times, as far back as history goes, you will find them. Well, let's try and figure out where they come from. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children of them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Enoch, which came of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Numbers 13:33. Now what I want you to pay close attention to is it specifically stated there were giants in those days and also after that. Now just think about that. When is after that? What timeline? How do we know they're gone? And if they are children of angelic beings, extraterrestrials, whatever you may call them, how do we know that they no longer exist in a spiritual form? Now this is something that's very, very interesting. Let's go ahead and dig in a little bit and see where this takes us. Now, if you will travel with me, let's go travel to the apocryphal text and the book of Enoch. Enoch had extensive knowledge of the fall of the angels. Let's see what he speaks of when he talks of these things. So you may ask, what is the significance of Enoch? Enoch, the son of Jared, the father of Methuselah. Methuselah, the father of Lamech, and Lamech, the father of Noah. And we all know what happened with Noah. Now, in the search to get to the giants, we are going to read a little bit from the book of Enoch, which, figuring out where they come from, we can figure out what happened. Now we'll go and do Enoch chapter 7. And it happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, and the daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, Come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us beget children. Then their leader Samyaza said to them, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for such a grievous crime. But they answered him, and said, We all swear, and bind ourselves by mutual execrations, that we will not change our intention, but execute our projected undertaking. Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execrations. Their whole number was 200, who descend upon Ardis, which is at the top of Mount Armin. The mountain therefore was called Armin, because they had sworn upon it, and bound themselves to the mutual execrations. Now, just for fun, I'd like to sidetrack and bring up a little something most people may not have noticed. But notice a resemblance between these two places. The one in the back is Mount Hermon, and the one up front is a motion picture studio that tends to make a lot of different movies. So, it's been said and theorized by many conspiracy theorists that is Mount Hermon, and the 22 stars represent the 22 angels spoken of in the book of Enoch, the ones that came down and by name are referenced. So I just thought that was a little side note, just to get you thinking a little bit. Now, I do apologize for getting sidetracked, but let's go ahead and get back on topic. Go back to Enoch. Continuing in chapter 6, they then took on wives, each choosing for himself whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabitated, teaching them sorcery, incantations, the dividing of roots. And the women conceived for them and brought forth giants, whose stature was 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible for them to feed. When they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, to eat their flesh one after another and drink their blood, then the earth will prove the unrighteousness. Well, when we're talking about 300 cubits, that's about 450 feet. So these things were huge, and they began to devour man, beast, fish, whales, many different things. And throughout Indian culture and Indian folklore and numerous folklore, there were giants big enough to yank whales out of the water. so we can only guess about how big that they were. So, something to think on. So with that, I'm going to insert one of my older videos that references the giants. So bear with me, but afterwards we will be going back to the topic. Is that written by the Paiutes? Among the traditions of our people is one of a small tribe of barbarians who used to live along the Humboldt River. It was many hundred years ago. They used to waylay my people and kill and eat them. They would dig large holes in our trails at night, and if any of our people traveled at night, which they did, for they were afraid of these barbarian people, they would be oftentimes fall into the holes. That tribe would eventually eat them. They would eat their own dead. Yes, they would even come and dig up our dead after they were buried, and would carry them off and eat them. Now and then they would come and make war with my people. They would fight, and as fast as they killed one another on either side, the women would carry off those who were dead. My people say that they were very brave. When they were fighting, they would jump into the air after the arrows that went over their heads, and they would shoot the same arrows back at us. My people took some of them into as their families, but they could not make them like themselves. So at last, they made war on them. This war lasted for a time. Their number was 2,600. The war lasted some 3 years. My people killed them in great numbers, and what few were left went into the thick brush. My people set the brush on fire. This was right above Humboldt Lake. Then they went to work and made tule and dullbrush boats and went into Humboldt Lake. They could not live there very long without fire. They were nearly starving. My people were watching them as they round the lake and would kill them as fast as they would come onto land. At last, one night, they all landed on the east side of the lake and went into the cave near the mountains. It was the most horrible place, for my people watched as the mouth of the cave, and they would kill them as they came out for water. My people would ask them if they would be like us, not to eat our people, not to be like coyotes or beasts. They talked in the same language, but they would not give up. At last, my people were tired, and they went to work and gathered wood and began to fill up the mouth of the cave. The poor fools. They began to drag the wood inside the cave until it was full, not knowing what my people would do. At last, my people set it on fire, and at the same time they cried out to them, "Will you give up and be like man, and not eat our people like beasts? Please say quick, and we will put out the fire." No answer came from the cave. My people said they thought the cave must have been very deep or far into the mountain. They had never seen a cave, nor knew it was there until then. They called out to them as loud as they could, "Will you please give up? Say so or you will die." But no answer came. Then they all left the place. In 10 days, some went back to see if the fire had gone out. They went back to my 3rd or 5th great-grandfather and told him that they all must be dead. There was such a horrible smell. This tribe was called the People Eaters, or the SI TECA. After my people killed them all, the people around us called us Se do Kara. It means the conqueror. It also means enemy. I do not know how we came with the name the Paiutes. It is not an Indian word. I think it is a misinterpretation. Sometimes we are called the Pine Nut Eaters, for we are the only tribe that lives in the country where the pine nuts grow. But my people say that the tribe we exterminated were very large with reddish hair. I have some of the hair which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress which has been made in our family and kept for many years, trimmed with the reddish hair of the giants we had to slay. The giants in that story, those giants were nowhere in stature in comparison to the giants of old, or at least in my belief. Those giants still did amazing feats, acrobatic and aerial, being able to grab arrows out of the air and shoot them back before ever hitting the ground. So that leads me to believe that these giants were anything but big and slow. Big, yes. Slow, seriously doubt. And if these generations of giants were that terrifying, can you really imagine what first generations were, when the blood was still pure and almost unmixed? Now that would be terrifying. Now, just from my perspective, and I may be wrong, but from what I've noticed and continue to notice is the depiction that is put out there for us about giants makes you question their intelligence level and that they're extremely dumb creatures. But I seriously doubt that, and I'll show you why. Now we have to remember who their parents were. If their parents were the fallen angels, who brought with them many different types of magnificent science, we have to question if they would not have passed it down to their children. So could these depictions possibly be right? Do we have to ask questions about the intelligence of these giants and these beings? Or would their parents have passed down the knowledge that they had carried down with them? Let's go ahead and jump into the book of Enoch and figure out what some of the knowledge they brought with them was. And moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, of all sorts of dyes, so the world would become altered. Impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. Amazarach taught all sorcerers and the dividers of roots. Armorers taught the solution of sorcery. Barkael taught the observation of the stars, astronomy. Akibiel taught signs. Tamiel taught astronomy. Asardel taught the motion of the moon. And men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached to heaven. Now there are many other fallen angels who taught numerous science to man. One in particular stood out. There is one named Penimu. He taught mankind the art of writing with ink and paper, and taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet secrets of wisdom. Sounds kind of like somebody taught men how to make contracts. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, and the fallen angel of contracts' name is Penimu. Coincidence? I think not. Now let's go ahead and get back to the giants. When we speak of giants, again, we have to wonder if 200 angels fell, but we don't hear much about the giants in the text. But we know that things were so horrible they had to be flooded. So how many different types of giants could there have been? How many different types of sorcery could they have used? Once again, a good question. But there were giants in that time and thereafter. We'll speak on that. Now back to reference the Enoch or the Anakins. You find them spoken of a few more times in scripture. Now the Anakins were after the flood. So this would continue to show that there was a line of giants or Nephilim beings of some form of blood still being passed down. Let me dive into that one a little bit also. Let's see what it has to say. Deuteronomy 2 verse 11. Which also were accounted giants, as the Anakims, but the Moabites called them the Emims. Deuteronomy 3 verse 13. And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, gave I on to the half tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argob, with Bashan, which was called the land of giants. Now, did you hear that? They actually referenced calling it the land of giants. Joshua 18 verse 16. And the border came down to the end of the mountain that lieth before the valley of the son of Hinnom, which in the valley of the giants on the north, and descended to the valley of Hinnom, to side of Jebusi of the south, and the descending of Enrogel. So needless to say, there are not only in the scriptures are many mentions of giants, but There are mentions of giants and many others. As the blood gets broken down, you'll notice that they change up a little bit. And based off of the names and the areas, this actually brings up a wonderful question. Were there more than one race of giants? Which in my mind, I believe so. If there were giants in the land in those days, wouldn't there have been races of giants all over the world according to what type they were? Once again, another question. So with all the races of giants and many different things there could be, how do we know that the angels only defiled human women? What if there were animals and chimeras and different things like that? They did teach sorcery. They did teach the beautifying, makeup, swords. They taught many different things. So when we look at what's going on today, when we look at these giants, they could have been men of great stature, but also men of great thought. What if some of the inventions that we use today are created by Nephilim, giants, or once again extraterrestrials, whatever we would consider them? No one knows if they still exist or they don't, but I believe in many things. I do believe they exist. So, what is the motivation? What makes these things do what they do? Wonderful question, but it can be answered in the book of Enoch. Now, these specific angels of the fallen, spoken of in Enoch 19, and Uriel said to me, "Here shall stand the angels, who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray to sacrificing on to demons as gods. Here shall they stand till the day of judgment, the great judgment in which they shall be judged till they are made an end of. And the women who are bound to themselves with the fallen angels shall become sirens in the ages of earth." Now, once again, pay close attention to the words. And their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind. Many different forms is the key. And the women who bound themselves with the fallen angels, they shall become sirens, which means in the future tense, they shall become sirens. So there's a lot there to unpackage. So the book of Enoch actually mentions sirens. So let me go off on a side note and talk about sirens for 2 seconds. A siren is a seducing creature, most of the time depicted in Greek mythology normally as a half bird, half woman, who lured sailors to their destruction by the sweetness of their singing voice, and they were often gifted in playing the lyre. So there's a lot to unpack there also. Who's to say how many different sirens there are? If there were 200 angels that took mates, who's to say there aren't 200 different sirens, or different types of sirens? The definition being a half bird, half woman is questionable because I've seen depictions as the half bird, half woman. I've also seen depiction of mermaids, and it was said by many seagoing people and people on ships that they would hear mermaids sing these beautiful songs, and men would jump overboard. And now in my mind, I don't know which one I would think would be the worst. One that flies overhead or one that comes up from sea. Now, once again, this brings up more questions. Many more questions about all the different types of things there could be, from fairies to sprites to leprechauns and all the things they say that are in the imagination. Maybe these things really aren't. What if they are descendants of the fallen? Now, if you go around and look at the different myths, there are many different types of creatures all over the world, cryptids, everything. But it kind of makes you wonder, with all the accounts, are these things really real? Or are they just figments of man's imagination? If you ask me, I believe that these things exist, and sometimes truth is way stranger than fiction could ever be. Thanks again for viewing, and comments are very welcome. Hope you enjoyed.